Before we begin this story, imagine a cowboy who could have had anyone in town, but chose the woman no one even saw. What happened next shook the whole frontier. Subscribe to Tales of the Cowboy, hit like and tell us, where are you watching from, partner? Let's get started. The night air outside the saloon smelled of whiskey, dust, and the smoke of cheap cigars. The piano clanked out a half-tuned melody, and the men inside cheered louder than they had in months. The outlaw gang that had tormented the town of Dust Creek was gone, thanks to one quiet young cowboy named Jack Ryder. His face was cut and bruised, his hat still scorched from the fight, but his eyes were calm. The sheriff slapped him on the back, grinning like the devil. "Boy, you just saved this whole damn town. You deserve a reward." Jack didn't answer right away. He was never one for talk or bragging. The whiskey in his glass sat untouched. Sheriff Dalton raised his voice, half laughing, half serious. "Hell, I'll give you anything you want. Any woman in this town, take your pick. The saloon girls are lining up already." Laughter erupted from the crowd, boots stomping the wooden floor. But Jack's gaze wasn't on the women smiling through painted lips. His eyes drifted past them, to the shadows at the back of the room. There, half hidden in lamplight, stood a woman with her sleeves rolled up, sweeping the floor. Her hair was dark and loose, her dress simple and worn from work. She wasn't laughing, just moving quietly, as though she wished to disappear. Dust rose with each sweep, catching the glow of the lanterns. Jack watched her a long moment. There was something in the way she carried her silence, strong but tired. When Sheriff Dalton repeated the offer, Jack spoke softly, almost to himself. "I choose her." The saloon went dead quiet. One of the gamblers let out a snort. "The Maid?" he said, sneering. "You gotta be joking, Ryder." Laughter bubbled up again, cruel and loud. The piano stopped playing. Jack turned his head slowly toward the sheriff, his jaw set. "I ain't joking. I'm not choosing beauty," he said firmly. "I'm choosing kindness." The words rolled through the room like thunder in dry air. Even the maid stopped sweeping, eyes wide with disbelief. Sheriff Dalton stared at him for a beat, then chuckled awkwardly. "Son, she ain't no prize. She's a worker. No family, no name worth remembering." Jack rose from his chair, dusting off his coat. "Then maybe that's why someone ought to remember her." He set down his hat, left the untouched whiskey behind, and walked toward the woman. Every eye in the saloon followed. Boots scraped, cards stopped mid-shuffle, and the old piano player whispered a prayer under his breath. The maid's name was Maria. Her hands were rough, her dress torn near the hem, and her eyes, those quiet, deep eyes, met his like she didn't know whether to run or cry. "You don't mean that," she murmured, voice trembling. Jack gave a small smile. "I don't say things I don't mean." She gripped the broom tighter. "They'll laugh at you," she said. "They already do," he replied. "But they don't matter." He reached out his hand, not demanding, just offering. Slowly, she took it, and for the first time in months, someone touched her without cruelty. They walked out into the cool Texas night. The moon hung low over the canyon rim, and the wind carried the distant song of a coyote. Behind them, laughter broke out again in the saloon, rough and mocking. Jack ignored it. "You don't owe me thanks," he said quietly as they reached his horse. "I just figured you looked like someone who's been forgotten too long." Maria's eyes glistened under the moonlight. "No one ever chose me before," she whispered. Jack looked at her and said, "Then tonight's a first, for both of us." By the time they reached his small cabin outside town, the horizon had turned soft with the coming dawn. Jack made coffee while Maria sat by the fire, silent, her hands shaking slightly. "You saved this town," she said after a while. "They don't seem to care much." Jack poured her a tin cup. "They care, just not about the right things." She smiled faintly, her eyes distant. "I used to think kindness was weakness," she murmured. "But maybe it's the only thing that lasts." Jack didn't reply, but the truth of her words filled the room. Outside, the sun painted the desert gold. For the first time in years, Jack felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he'd long buried beneath regret and silence. Maria finished her coffee and stood, glancing toward the fields beyond. "You live alone?" she asked softly. "Mostly," he said. But I reckon that could change." She looked at him, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. In his eyes, she saw the same thing she'd lost long ago. Hope, fragile but real, growing like a flower in the desert dust. As the morning stretched on, Maria stepped outside, breathing in the dry, open air. The wind tugged gently at her hair, carrying away the scent of smoke and sorrow. Jack watched her from the doorway, feeling something he hadn't in years: peace. It wasn't the wild kind that came from winning gunfights or chasing glory. It was quieter, like a promise whispered between broken hearts that had somehow found their way home again. By sunrise, Dust Creek was already buzzing with whispers. The Maid and the Cowboy. The talk traveled faster than wildfire through dry grass. Some called it foolish, others sinful, and a few said Jack Ryder had lost his mind entirely. But Jack didn't care. While others gossiped in the saloon, he was already out at his ranch, hammering new fence posts into the hard Texas earth. Maria brought him water, quiet as always. Her hands still blistered from work. Every time she passed him the jug, she tried to thank him. Every time he shook his head. "Don't," he said softly. Sheriff Dalton came by that afternoon, dust rising behind his horse. He dismounted slow, jaw tight. "You could have had anyone, son," he said. "Instead, you picked trouble." Jack leaned on the fence rail, sweat dripping down his temple. "Anyone can have a pretty face, Sheriff. But not everyone's got a soul like hers," the older man sighed, tipping his hat. "You're a damn fool," Jack nodded. "Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool with peace than a hero with nothing." The sheriff rode off without another word, leaving silence and sunlight in his wake. Weeks turned into months, and the two of them fell into rhythm like rain meeting soil. Maria cooked, laughed softly when he burned his breakfast, and hummed songs in Spanish as they worked the field. At night, they sat by the porch lantern, neither speaking much, both content with the sound of the wind through the mesquite trees. Jack would glance at her sometimes, wondering how something so simple could feel so right. She'd catch him staring, smile shyly, and he'd look away, pretending to be checking his boots. But peace never lasted long in the west. One evening, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. 5 riders coming fast. Jack's jaw tightened. He recognized their swagger even from miles away. The remnants of the same outlaw gang he'd driven off months ago, come back for blood. "Get inside," he told Maria. She shook her head. "I'm not hiding." He grabbed his rifle from the wall. "I ain't asking." Her voice cut through the air, calm but strong. "And I ain't afraid." Jack stared at her and for a second saw the same fire that had made him choose her. When the riders reached the gate, the leader sneered. "I heard the hero of Dust Creek took himself a servant girl." He spat. "Thought we'd pay our respects." Jack didn't flinch. "You best turn your horses around," he said evenly. The man laughed. "What?" A bullet answered him. The fight erupted like thunder. Gunfire cracked through the quiet plains, echoing off the rocks. Jack ducked behind the corral, returning fire, heart pounding. Beside him, Maria knelt in the dirt, hands steady as she loaded rounds. "Here," she said. Her eyes met his, fierce and fearless. "We fight together." By the time the smoke cleared, the air reeked of gunpowder and death. 3 men lay still. The rest fled into the hills. Jack stood, chest heaving, his sleeve torn and bleeding. Maria dropped the rifle, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. She ran to him. "You should have chosen someone better," she whispered through shaking breath. Jack reached up, wiping the dirt from her face. "There ain't better, Maria," he said softly. "There's just right." She pressed her forehead against his, the setting sun bathing them both in gold and fire. The war was over. That night, they sat on the porch steps, silence between them more comfortable than words. Jack's arm rested around her shoulders, her head against his chest. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked quietly. "Sometimes," she said, "but then I remember what I left behind, and what I found here." He smiled faintly. "Guess that makes 2 of us." The stars came out glittering across the endless Texas sky, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sound of their quiet laughter into the dark. Over time, folks in town stopped whispering. They saw the way Maria carried herself, head high, eyes steady. They saw how Jack changed too. The once quiet cowboy who never smiled now greeted strangers with warmth. When her laugh echoed through the general store, even Sheriff Dalton smiled. "Guess you were right after all," he told Jack one morning. "Kindness ain't weakness," Jack tipped his hat. "Never was. Life on the ranch grew fuller with every season. The crops started to grow again, and so did something else, hope. A kind of peace that only comes after surviving too much hurt." Years later, Dust Creek would remember Jack Ryder not just as the man who saved the town from outlaws, but as the one who taught it that love wasn't about pride or reward, it was about grace. They'd say he found gold in the desert, but it wasn't gold at all. It was a woman who'd been invisible to the world until one man saw her worth. Together, they built a life the West couldn't burn away. And when the sun sank low over the prairie, their laughter still lingered in the wind long after both had gone. Sometimes, legends aren't born from gunfights or glory. They're born from quiet choices made in forgotten corners of the frontier. A cowboy choosing compassion over pride. A woman choosing trust over fear. Two souls finding each other when the world had already given up on them. And somewhere beyond the hills of Dust Creek, under that same golden sky, the story of Jack and Maria lived on, not in history books, but in hearts that still believed in mercy and the kind of love only the Wild West could forge.